Hello, friend. Welcome to History ZZZ. Get comfortable. Let your body settle into wherever you are resting. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands go still. Take one slow breath in and let it go. Tonight, I want to tell you about an object. Not a war, not an empire, not a city, just one object sitting quietly in the basement of a museum in Baghdad, waiting for someone to understand it. It is a clay jar about 5 inches tall, unremarkable to look at. The kind of vessel that gets cataloged and shelved and largely forgotten in the basement of any museum that has thousands of objects to manage. But this jar is not ordinary. Inside it, there is a copper cylinder, and inside the cylinder, an iron rod. And if you fill the jar with an acidic liquid, vinegar or grape juice or lemon water, the whole assembly generates an electrical current. The jar is approximately 2,000 years old. No one knows what it was for. Lie back. Let your breathing slow. Tonight we go to ancient Iraq to ask a question that has no settled answer. The year is 1938. Wilhelm Koenig is a German archaeologist working at the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad. He is not the most famous man in his field, but he is thorough. He has spent years cataloging artifacts from excavations around the country, the accumulated evidence of a civilization that stretches back to the very beginning of recorded history. One afternoon, he is going through storage boxes in the museum basement. The kind of work that most archaeologists don't glamorize. Artifacts that have been collected but not yet properly studied. Things waiting for someone to pay attention. He picks up a clay jar. It is from a site near the village of Kujut Rabua, southeast of Baghdad. Parthian period, based on the surrounding finds. Roughly 2,000 years old. Inside the jar, he finds the copper cylinder, sealed at one end with asphalt. Inside the cylinder, corroded but still recognizable, the iron rod. He stares at it. He has seen a lot of ancient objects. He has never seen anything like this. He takes notes. He photographs it. He publishes a paper. And then the world slowly starts paying attention. Let's look at the object carefully. The jar itself is terracotta, the same fired clay used for ordinary storage containers throughout the ancient Near East. Nothing unusual about the jar. Inside the opening, there is a copper sheet rolled into a cylinder about 1.5 inches in diameter and 4 inches tall. The bottom of the cylinder is capped with a disc of copper, sealed in place with a layer of asphalt. The top is sealed with asphalt as well. Through the center of the copper cylinder, suspended so that it does not touch the copper on any side, there is a rod of iron. The iron rod is held in place by the asphalt plug at the top. The assembly is essentially complete. It is not broken or incomplete. Someone made it this way, deliberately. When researchers in the 20th century reconstructed the device and filled the interior with an acidic solution, it generated between 0.5 volt and just over 1 volt of electrical current, similar to a modern AA battery. The device works. It was made 2,000 years ago, and we do not know what anyone used it for. The artifact comes from a region that was, at the time it was made, controlled by the Parthian Empire. The Parthians were a fascinating and underappreciated civilization. They rose to power in what is now Iran and Iraq around 250 BCE, and they lasted for nearly 5 centuries, longer than the Roman Empire. They stopped Rome's eastward expansion twice in major battles. They controlled the Silk Road. They were the middlemen of the ancient world. But the Parthians left fewer written records than the Egyptians or Romans, and they have never quite captured the popular imagination the way their neighbors have. The land around Baghdad in Parthian times was the same land it had always been. the flat plain between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, ancient beyond reckoning, the cradle of writing and mathematics and astronomy and law. Babylon was nearby, its famous ruins still visible, still studied, still visited. Whoever made the Baghdad Battery made it in this landscape, surrounded by the ruins of older civilizations, heirs to thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, in a world that was simultaneously ancient and cosmopolitan. What they knew, what they could do, we are still figuring it out. What was the Baghdad Battery for? This is the question that has occupied researchers, enthusiasts, and skeptics for 80 years. And the honest answer is that we do not know. There are several serious theories. The most dramatic, it was used for electroplating. If you connect the battery to a solution containing dissolved gold or silver, you can deposit a thin layer of metal onto an object. This process, electroplating, was supposedly invented in the 19th century. But if the Parthians had batteries, they may have been doing it 2,000 years earlier. Testing this theory, researchers have successfully electroplated objects using replicas of the Baghdad Battery. It works. Whether the ancient world actually used it this way is another question. A second theory, the jars were used for storing sacred scrolls, and the components were unrelated, different pieces packed together by accident. A third, the copper and iron rods were used in some kind of medicinal practice, perhaps generating a mild shock for therapeutic purposes. None of these theories has been proved, none has been disproved. The object sits quietly and does not explain itself. Here's what we know about ancient metalworking in this region. The Mesopotamian tradition of working metals was extraordinary. The craftsmen of ancient Iraq worked in gold, silver, copper, bronze, iron, and their alloys with a precision and artistry that still astonishes modern researchers. The royal tombs of Ur, excavated in the 1920s and 1930s, roughly contemporary with the Baghdad Battery finds, contained metalwork of such refinement that jewelers today study it to learn technique. Gold headdresses, silver lyres, electrum bowls, copper helmets so well made they look freshly cast, and gilded objects with very thin, very even coatings of gold over base metal, appear throughout ancient Mesopotamian and Persian art. Here's the interesting thing. Some of those ancient gilded objects have gold coatings so thin and so even that modern analysis cannot explain how they were achieved using the fire gilding methods we know the ancients used. Fire gilding done skillfully can produce a beautiful result, but it cannot easily produce the kind of even, microscopically thin coating seen on some ancient pieces. Electroplating can. This is the thread that keeps the battery theory alive. Not just that the device works, but that the metalwork of the ancient world sometimes seems to require a method we cannot fully account for. Now let's hear the other side, because there is one. Most mainstream archaeologists are skeptical of the Baghdad Battery theory. The main argument against it: we have thousands of years of written records from ancient Iraq. The Mesopotamians wrote down everything: grain deliveries, legal contracts, astronomical observations, religious rituals, diplomatic letters. They had writing for 5,000 years. In all of that writing, there is not a single reference to electrical devices, not to batteries, not to electroplating, not to anything that suggests anyone in ancient Mesopotamia understood electricity. This silence is significant. When an ancient civilization used a technology, they tended to write about it. They kept records. They trained apprentices. They passed knowledge down. If the Baghdad Battery was generating electrical current and being used for practical purposes, Where is the apprentice manual? Where is the temple record? Where is the letter that says I need 2 more copper cylinders by Tuesday? There is none. The skeptics say the combination of copper, iron, and acidic residue is probably coincidence. The jar was used for something mundane, scrolls perhaps, or just storage, and the materials inside it ended up there by accident or for unrelated reasons. Maybe. Maybe not. The object does not tell us. In the 1970s, a German Egyptologist named Arne Egebrecht conducted an experiment that caught a lot of attention. He built a replica of the Baghdad Battery. He filled it with freshly pressed grape juice, acidic, commonly available in the ancient world. He connected the battery to a container of gold chloride solution. In 2 hours, a thin layer of gold had been deposited on a silver statuette. The experiment worked. Gold electroplating, using only materials available in ancient Iraq, powered by the Baghdad Battery design. Egebrecht went further. He connected multiple battery replicas in series, the way you might put several batteries together to increase the voltage. The current increased accordingly. He proposed that ancient craftsmen may have been using batteries without understanding what electricity was. The same way that ancient people used fermentation to make wine and bread without understanding yeast. You don't need a theory, you just need to notice that if you do this, that happens, and you pass the recipe down. This is a genuinely interesting thought. Knowledge doesn't always come with explanation. Sometimes it just comes with results. The Tigris River runs through what is now Baghdad. It has been running through this landscape for millions of years, and humans have been living beside it for at least 10,000. The river was the reason for everything. The flat, fertile plain that could feed enormous populations, the water that made the desert bloom, the highway that connected the mountains to the sea. In Parthian times, the Tigris carried trade goods from as far away as India and China, from Rome and Egypt, from Central Asia and the Arabian Peninsula. The ancient world was more connected than we sometimes imagine. The craftsmen of this city would have had access to materials from extraordinary distances: copper from Cyprus or the Sinai, iron from Anatolia, acidic fruits from orchards along the river, gold and silver from trade with half the known world. Whatever the Baghdad Battery was for, it was made in a city that stood at the center of a web of knowledge and commerce that stretched across the ancient world. The river moves past in the dark. It does not know what the jar was for either. It has been moving too long to care about individual mysteries. Here is a detail that the popular accounts often leave out. There is not one Baghdad Battery, there are multiple. Koenig identified about a dozen similar objects from the same site and surrounding excavations. The design is consistent enough that it appears to be a deliberate artifact type, not a one-off accident, but something that was being made repeatedly. If the copper and iron combination inside the jar were purely accidental, if the components had ended up together by chance, you would not expect to find the same configuration in jar after jar across the same site. The consistency suggests intent. The same problem. If someone was intentionally building these devices and using them for something, and making enough of them that they turn up in significant numbers in one location, there should be other evidence, a pattern in the archaeological record. An unusual concentration of electroplated objects nearby, some trace of the purpose these things served. There is not. Multiple jars with the same design, no documentation, no context, no explanation. Just the objects, sitting in the dark of the museum basement, generating their quiet little current for no one. In April 2003, the National Museum of Iraq was looted. As American forces entered Baghdad and the city fell into chaos, the museum was left unguarded. Over several days, thieves carried off an estimated 15,000 objects, artifacts spanning 7,000 years of human civilization. Sumerian cylinder seals, Assyrian ivories, Babylonian tablets, Roman glass. The Baghdad Battery was not among the stolen objects. It was in a secure storage area and survived. But many things did not survive. The looting of the Iraqi National Museum was one of the greatest cultural losses of the modern era. Items that had survived thousands of years, that had outlasted empires and invasions and floods and fires, vanished in a matter of days. Some were recovered, many were not. The battery jar survived. It is still in Baghdad. It is, in a way, one of the luckier objects. Its obscurity protected it. Nobody knew exactly what it was, and so nobody specifically tried to take it. Sometimes the unexplained has a kind of protection in its mystery. What would the ancient Mesopotamians have used for the electrolyte? An electrolyte is the acidic liquid that fills the jar and completes the electrical circuit. Without it, the device generates nothing. The ancient world had excellent candidates. Vinegar, diluted acetic acid, was produced throughout the ancient Near East. It was used for food preservation, medicine, cleaning, and cooking. Every household would have had some. Grape juice, freshly pressed, is also acidic enough to work. Wine, before it ferments, works. Tamarind juice, widely available in the region, works extremely well. Date palm vinegar, made from the dates that were one of the most important crops in ancient Mesopotamia, would have been commonly available and is an effective electrolyte. In other words, if someone in ancient Iraq wanted to fill this jar with something that would make it generate electricity, they would not have had to go far to find it. The materials were ordinary, everywhere, cheap. The question remains, did anyone know to use them this way? Did anyone notice the faint tingle of current from the rod? Did someone 2,000 years ago understand what was happening even without a word for electricity? We do not know. Here's something worth thinking about as you rest. We have a tendency to assume that knowledge moves forward in a straight line, that the ancient world knew less than we do, in every domain always, that the curve of human understanding goes one direction. But this is not quite right. The ancient world knew things we have lost. The specific composition of Roman concrete, which has lasted 2,000 years better than modern concrete, was only recently decoded. The acoustic design of ancient Greek theaters, which can project an unamplified voice to 10,000 people with perfect clarity, remains incompletely understood. The navigational methods of Polynesian sailors who crossed the largest ocean on Earth in wooden canoes guided by stars and wave patterns and the flight of birds are only now being reconstructed. Knowledge can be accumulated, used, and then lost. Entire libraries have burned. Entire traditions have been disrupted by conquest or plague, or the simple fact that the last person who knew a thing died before passing it on. The Baghdad Battery might be evidence of exactly this, a technique that was discovered, used, and then lost, leaving behind only a clay jar and a question that still has no answer. Think about what a night was like in ancient Iraq. No electric light, no street lights. The darkness was real darkness, the kind that modern urban dwellers almost never experience. By night, the ancient world navigated by fire, lamps burning olive oil or sesame oil or bitumen, torches, hearths. The stars were extraordinarily visible. The Mesopotamians were among the great astronomers of the ancient world. They tracked the planets across the sky for centuries, building up records precise enough that their observations are still useful to modern historians. They named the constellations. They predicted eclipses. They understood that Venus was a planet. All of this was done by careful observation, meticulous record keeping, and the slow accumulation of pattern over generations. The same civilization that tracked the stars with such precision also made the Baghdad Battery. What else did they notice? What else did they track, record, and use that we have not yet recovered? The night sky over ancient Iraq is the same one we see now. The stars have shifted slightly in 2,000 years, but they are there. Look up, wherever you are. The same sky. Gold has a particular hold on the human imagination. It does not rust, it does not tarnish, it is found in its pure state in nature, requiring no smelting or processing, just washing from river gravel or picking up from the ground. For most of human history, these properties made it magical, permanent, divine. The gods were associated with gold. The sun was associated with gold. Kings and pharaohs covered themselves in it to borrow, visually and symbolically, some of that permanence. And so the ability to coat an object in gold, to take ordinary copper or silver and give it the appearance of permanence, would have been a powerful skill, not just commercially valuable, spiritually significant. A craftsman who could gold-plate a cult statue might have been seen as someone with unusual access to divine properties, someone who could call down something of the eternal. If the Baghdad Battery was used for electroplating, it was not merely an industrial tool. It would have been a religious instrument. The tiny current flowing from the clay jar into the gold solution, unseen, unfelt, unnamed, quietly transferring the appearance of the divine onto the mundane, whether or not anyone understood what was actually happening. There is a kind of silence that great mysteries have, not the silence of absence, not the silence of a room that has nothing in it, the silence of something that knows and is not saying. The Baghdad Battery has this quality. It sits in its museum case, giving nothing away. Every generation of researchers comes to it with new tools, better chemical analysis, more precise dating techniques, more complete understanding of ancient metalworking. And every generation learns a little more, and the mystery shifts slightly and then remains. There are other out-of-place artifacts in history, objects that seem to belong to a later era than the one they come from. Most of them turn out on close examination to have mundane explanations: contamination, misdating, misidentification. The Baghdad Battery has survived all of that scrutiny. It has been examined, replicated, dated, and debated. It still generates its quiet current. It still has no explanation that everyone agrees on. The silence continues. Imagine the person who made it. We do not know their name. We do not know their gender. We do not know if they were a citizen of the city or a stranger passing through. We do not know if they fully understood what they were doing or were following a recipe passed down from a teacher who learned it from a teacher who learned it from someone before that. What we can say, they were skilled. The construction of the object is deliberate and well executed. The copper cylinder is rolled and sealed correctly. The iron rod is properly centered. The asphalt seals are applied with care. This is the work of someone who knew how to do it. They would have worked in a workshop, probably near the market district. They would have had tools, copper shears, soldering equipment of some kind, a supply of the asphalt that oozed naturally from the ground in this region in black, sticky deposits that everyone used for everything. At some point they made this jar, they sealed it, they put it somewhere, and then they died and took whatever they knew with them. And the jar sat in the ground for 2,000 years, waiting for someone to ask the right question. The site where the battery was found, Kujut Rabua, is southeast of modern Baghdad in the flat alluvial plain. It is not dramatic landscape, no mountains, no cliffs, just the flat, dusty plain that stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction, interrupted by the threads of the rivers and the low mounds that are the compressed remains of ancient cities. These mounds are everywhere in Iraq. They are called tells. Each one is a city or a village, compressed by time into a low hill. Thousands of years of building and rebuilding on the same spot, each generation's ruins becoming the foundation for the next. When you walk in this landscape, you are walking on top of history in a very literal sense. Every step might be on top of something 10,000 years old. The battery jar sat in one of these mounds for 2,000 years. Through Parthian collapse, Sassanid conquest, Arab conquest, Mongol invasion, Ottoman rule, British mandate, independence, revolution, war, the jar sat in its stratum and waited, 2,000 years of silence above it, then the spade. Somewhere in Baghdad, in a museum that has survived wars and looting and the long wait of history, the battery jar rests in its case. The city outside is alive, a city of millions, electric with modern light, the Tigris still running through it as it always has. The jar does not know any of this. It is inert without its electrolyte. Without the acidic liquid, there is no current, no reaction, no activity at all. It is just a clay vessel with a copper cylinder and an iron rod inside. A potential. Objects from the ancient world are like this. They carry a potential that is unlocked by understanding, by someone who knows what they are and what they mean and what questions they raise. Without someone to ask the question, the battery jar is just a jar. With the question, it becomes a window into the possible. What did the ancient world know? What did they discover and use and then lose? What is sitting in a museum basement right now, correctly labeled and thoroughly ununderstood, waiting for someone to fill it with the right liquid and watch something happen? The question of the Baghdad Battery is not, at its heart, about electricity. It is about what we assume. We tend to assume that technological capability follows a smooth upward curve, that the past was simply less capable than the present in every domain in an orderly progression. The Baghdad Battery is an object that resists this assumption. It says, maybe someone figured something out long ago. Maybe they used it. Maybe it was so embedded in craft tradition that no one felt the need to write it down. The same way we do not write down how to ride a bicycle because everyone who needs to know learns it by doing. Maybe the knowledge died not because it was suppressed or forgotten, but simply because the chain of transmission was broken. A plague, a siege, a workshop that closed when its owner died and left no apprentice. Knowledge is fragile. It requires continuous human attention to survive. The battery jar survived because it was made of clay and copper and iron. The knowledge of what to do with it did not survive because knowledge is made of people, and people do not last as long as clay. Let the night settle around you. The mystery of the Baghdad Battery will still be there in the morning. It has been there for 2,000 years. It is patient. What we know, someone made it, deliberately, in ancient Iraq. It generates electricity. We do not know why. What we feel when we hold the question lightly, the past is larger than we can imagine. The people who lived before us were not primitive, not limited, not simply waiting for us to come along and figure things out. They were curious and capable and inventive, They paid close attention to the world. They noticed things. Maybe one of them noticed the faint sensation from a copper rod in a jar of vinegar. Maybe they wondered. Maybe they experimented. Maybe they found a use for it and used it and taught their children, and the children taught their children, and then one day the chain broke and the knowledge was gone and only the jar remained. We are still asking the question. You are safe. You are here. The mystery is old and harmless and quiet. Good night from ancient Iraq. Good night. Thank you for sitting with this mystery. If you enjoyed this journey, History ZZZ has many more waiting for you. Ancient Kyoto, Heian Poetry, The Mystery of Roanoke. Wherever you would like to rest tonight, we have a world for you. Sleep well wherever you are. History ZZZ.